So what is it like crossing the Everglades, especially on a bicycle? How much of it can you really see from land? More about that in a minute, but first, I want to apologize for how long it took to get this video out to you guys. I rode through the Everglades 4 or 5 weeks ago, and I'm just now sitting down to edit together all the footage and show you the answer to that question. I hope you enjoy. After 3 days on my brother's farm, we hugged him and the family goodbye and then rode south on Tamiami Trail down to Fort Myers, where my good friend Trey lives. It was getting towards the end of the day by the time we got there. About 75 miles from my brother's farm to my buddy Trey's place, we were crossing the Caloosahatchee River right around sunset. Now, Florida doesn't quite have a monopoly on sunsets, but it seems like every night they bring an absolute banger out to the western sky. And that's exactly what we saw when we were coming in on this night. It was my favorite part of the day, once again. We took the day to stay at Trey's because that cold front was still coming through Florida, and even though it was freezing, we said, we're not going to miss out on a day at the beach, even if we do have to wear pants, sweatshirts, and have the entire place to ourselves because it's so freezing there. We even had to set up a tent just to block the wind so that we could sit there, smoke a cigar and chat, maybe eat some food, because obviously we weren't going to go swimming and get hypothermia or something. Our friend Jake, no relation, was there, and he also runs a YouTube channel and made a vlog about the whole thing. You can see how hectic it really was. You can go check out his video. I'll put a link to it in the description of this one. I was glad to have a roof over my head back at Trey's place where we spent the night, because we were leaving the beach just as the storm was ramping up. We picked up a couple of those $8 job frozen pizzas from Aldi, threw them in the oven, had family-style dinner that night. The next morning, we went to Mass, rode out to Fort Myers and down to the super fancy and rich Naples, Florida. To the people who live there, it's a bastion of old money. Luxury cars, designer shops, exclusive yacht clubs. But to us, it was just the last stop we had to make before we banged a left-hand turn on the Tamiami Trail, went due east, and were out in the Everglades for the next couple of days. We teetered on that fine line between civilization and out in the Everglades by camping in a triangle of woods that hadn't been developed yet, right between the city and the glades themselves. I bedded down that night in my tent on land that would soon be developed, thinking that there would be a house here, and maybe in this very place a master bedroom where someone else would sleep in greater luxury, not knowing that I had been here in a tent not long before.
We are literally sitting in a Macca's again, not even wanting to eat, but we are trying to avoid the cold because apparently Florida remains cold.
Indeed, it does. Again, winter follows me. I go south, winter goes south. Now we're down in Florida, and they're having some of the coldest temperatures they've had in decades. But that's nothing new. It's been the weather system following us since the Panhandle, and that would follow us right on through the Everglades themselves. But after so much time on the road, I'm used to adversity. And besides, I was loath to finish this trip and didn't want it to end right away. So I didn't mind the extra time we took through the Everglades and be making as many stops as we could. Like the marsh trail. It was our first turnoff of many, and we walked down through the marsh and into an estuary where gators were sunbathing, birds were drying their wings, and life was just everywhere. Fish under the water, birds fishing for them, even this blue heron that grabbed a fish I thought was way too big for it to swallow, just to see it go down its throat and its throat triple in size, and then stand there and stare off into the mangroves with a feeling I'm sure we're all familiar with. Oh crap. I ate too much and now I can't move. It was a treat to see an area of nature like this with a zoo-like density of animals. This is the dry season in Florida, and what I would learn is that all the animals go down to the lowest areas like canals and estuaries to wait out the dry season and are all bunched together. Once the rain comes, they'll spread back out over the land, which right now is pretty dried up and cracked mud, or it's prairies that will be covered and turned into marshes when the rains do come and the water does rise. The Everglades is a lot more than just a swamp. There's all kinds of different landscapes within this one area we call the Everglades, and a lot of its history is hidden within the geological record beneath the surface of this place. Even what we do know about this place, after European settlement, through written history until now, is fascinating. Like the Seminole Wars, when the U.S. Army tried to run the Seminoles into a reservation, and basically their greatest ally, the mosquito, intervened and drove the army back, making them the only group of natives who never signed a surrender document to the United States government. There's still quite a few natives that live in the area as well. Some of them we'll meet later on in the video when they're wrestling alligators. For now, suffice it to say that this landscape has a very checkered past between European arrival and now. Everyone wanted a piece of it. The army, the government at large, the engineers who wanted to cut it up for canals, the planters who wanted to put sugar on land drained by those canals, the hunters shooting colorful birds to put the feathers in fancy hats made for women, fishermen out for the fish, gator hunters out for the gator leather, and homesteaders coming in with the promise of a farm only to find what they had bought was underwater. And a lot of it is no longer there anymore. It's been converted to suburbs, agriculture land, and otherwise drained and cut up for other purposes, like airports, roads, even a prison that holds migrants. And this tiny little shack, which is the smallest operating U.S. post office in the country. It's a tiny little thing and serves the people who live out here in the Everglades. By the time we got to the Big Cypress National Preserve, it felt like we were getting into the really neat stuff that we would only see here and nowhere else. Now, Big Cypress is a swamp, meaning it's a wetland where hardwood trees grow, which is mostly cypress, but others as well. But it felt even cooler being there, knowing it was almost turned into an extension of Miami, complete with jet port and housing developments. But that didn't happen. Instead, it got preserved into this landscape. One of the few large tracts of land that shows you what old Florida really looked like. With its many trails and back roads, this area was a lot more suitable to explore on a bicycle because it's more firm ground. There's still stuff underwater, maybe during the wet season, but with the drought Florida's experiencing right now, all this stuff was accessible. It's nothing like the 10,000 Islands or the Everglades National Park or further down the line where it truly is what they call the River of Grass, a poetic name for a landscape that you can really only get to by canoe, and at that, with an experienced enough navigator that you're able to get back. Right around here, the slight wobble in my rear wheel turned into a major wobble. I had to disconnect the rear brake so that it wouldn't wobble onto the brake pads and infinitely slow me down. I had to take it to a shop, but there was none out here. The best I could do was disconnect the rear brake so that it wouldn't rub anymore, and hope it didn't get any worse by the time I got to a shop. I gotta say, this was the last thing I was expecting in the Everglades. I thought by this time we'd be safe. I mean, it's about as far south as you can get, and they don't get frost. They just don't. It just doesn't happen. But here we were, waking up in Big Cypress, and everything was covered in frost.
And this cold snap isn't just affecting farms. The past couple days have marked South Florida's coldest temperatures in more than a decade. Miami dipping to 35 degrees, the lowest since December of 2010.
To put this in context, I started the trip last May 2025, and a couple days in, I was heading into the Olympic Mountains in Washington. Okay, those were still covered in snow, even in early June. I started the river as the last person that year or that season to descend the river, knowing the winter was coming after me. The whole time I was paddling, I had one thing on my mind, and that was outrunning the winter. And now, when I get down to Florida, I think, okay, I'm safe. I got away from winter. And here I am all the way down in the Everglades, and they're having the coldest temperatures they've had since 2010. That's crazy. It was literally from one end to the other, trying to outrun the cold. The gators didn't mind. There was a lot of stuff going around on the internet about iguanas falling out of trees and freezing to death and all that. I wouldn't worry about them. They're invasive anyways. It really doesn't break my heart. These gators, though, they used to be endangered. The American alligator, and this, the Everglades, is their main habitat. I don't think an occasional frost, 1 in 15 years, is going to hurt them, and at least they looked fine to me the next morning because they were all out in the sun, warming up from the night before, and fat and happy as ever. Here's a gator with a Gatorade.
There's so many of them.
There's tons of them. If you want to go down to the Everglades and wonder if you're going to see alligators, you will. We saw so many that by the time we got to the other side, we were done stopping for them. We'd just point them out as we went down the road, and then we'd ignore them altogether because they were everywhere. What I alluded to earlier in the video was something I figured out during this section. If you go to the Everglades, you really ought to do it justice by going there in a boat. It can be an airboat, or a canoe, or a kayak, or something, but there's not a whole lot of it that you can see from land. So from the land, we took as many alternates as we could, like those RV trails in Big Cypress, the Loop Road, down to the Oasis Visitor Center, where there's the southern terminus of the Florida Trail, and stopping off and exploring the campgrounds along the way instead of just finding something along the road where we could stay the night. In this way, we saw as much as I think a person can when they're going across the Everglades on land. But if we were to really do this place justice, we'd come back in a boat, go down to the 10,000 islands, paddle through sites out there, and see a lot more of the wildlife that lives in that edge land between the two, where it's part soil, part water, part underwater, part in the air. It's like a safari. You just can't get away from all the wildlife out here, even if you wanted to, which I don't. But the place is like tons of fish under the surface and gators swimming around or sunning themselves and like birds everywhere. There was a bit of traffic around the visitor center and stuff, and they had these like 3 pet gators everyone was looking at, but we're on a dirt road right now called Loop Road, staying at a campground in Big Cypress National Preserve here for the night, and then gonna keep exploring tomorrow. And here we are the next morning. It's actually early, one of our first early mornings. We're actually getting out of here. The cold snap maybe is over. We'll see, but I gotta go to a bike shop, so that's the goal today. I wanted to see one more thing on the eastern end of the Everglades before we rode out and left. That was the Miccosukee tribe. These are the guys that wrestle the alligators in a roadside show that they charge $15 to come and see.
All over the back of the alligator, they have these bony ridges called scoops, which are free-floating bone plates that not only serve as a natural armor of the alligator, but they function very similar to solar panels. So
basically, one guy told us about the alligator itself, while the other guy went in there with a stick and started poking it and dragging it and chasing it around until it wore itself out. Then he pulled it back up onto the sand and started showing different ways he could pin it down. It's a lot easier to hold a gator's mouth shut than it is to get your arm out of the gator's mouth once it's already clamped down. And by the way this guy was moving, it looked like he had done this hundreds of times. Like he was bored with it. Like this was just another day at work. And I guess that's exactly what it was. And it wasn't as dangerous as I thought it was. It's pretty straightforward, actually. And I could see how a lot of people who don't really know anything about alligators could watch one YouTube video about it, jump on top of a gator and make it work for themselves. Even though these guys made it very clear that you shouldn't do that and you should only wrestle a gator if you're a pro. It looked like it could be done.
they got a piece of rope, tie them out very quick. And just like that, it's a bite. Well, you guys are not going to get big for this. It's going to be a very safe encounter.
And check this out. They taped one's mouth shut, a 2-year-old, and even let me hold it. The ride out from the Miccosukee village was tricky the rest of the way going east because they had road work going on with no shoulders and no alternatives to ride on the side of because it was all the river of grass. It was pretty though, really nice to look at, and we did get a break from weaving between Jersey barriers when we were out on the bridges that crossed this area. But soon after that, we turned right on Crone Avenue, which looks from the map like it's about the western edge of the suburbs and where the wild part of the Everglades start. We rode south on there and I pulled into a library to make some calls to bike shops just to find out no one would be able to fix my bike for the next 2 days. No way I was going to pay for a hotel that long waiting on a simple bike repair, so I got on YouTube, figured it out for myself, and made a passable repair that turned my wheel from something wobbling back and forth the whole way to only wobbling a tiny bit and not rubbing on the brakes anymore. It's not perfect, but at least it spins now. And you can see it still has some wobble in it, but I've went through and tightened a lot of the spokes, tried to eyeball it so that it would spin without all that wobble. Not bad for a couple of YouTube videos and this multi-tool. Today's February 4th, 2026. I started this trip May 31st, 2025. And that is the first sign I've seen for my destination, Key West. I've been at this for a long time, and the end is pretty close. It's almost over. I'm actually excited. I thought I'd be bummed out at this point to finish, but I'm excited. I'm almost there. I almost did it. You know? I'm getting close. This This is where we stayed last night. It's the Maori Canal, one of the many canals in the network to drain the Everglades and make this agricultural land of places where people live. We're just trying to stay right between the water and where his crops start. And then across the canal, some kind of chicken farm. And we found that out when the roosters started crowing at I started hearing them at 4 something this morning. And right now it's a little after 6. We're gonna eat some breakfast and get on the road. I made my way here from northwestern Washington state. And roughly speaking, my route got a little less wild the further east and the further south that I went. The Everglades was the last bastion of somewhat quasi-wilderness as I came down to my final destination in Key West. It was really something. I mean, the ecosystem there is phenomenal and unlike anywhere in the world. I'm very grateful for the time I got to spend down there and that I got to see as much wacky stuff as I did. There was one bird with pink feathers, not a flamingo, but something called a roseate spoonbill. As many times as I saw this thing, it was extremely elusive, and I was never able to capture it on camera. And the Everglades is like that. It's a feeling that you just can't capture totally on camera. I did my best in this video, and even that was limited because I never got off of land and into the water where the real Everglades lives. It's not anything like it used to be, from everything that I've read, but it still does seem like a massive zoo with no cages. And I'd highly recommend anyone who's considering to go check it out. For me, it was just a stop along the way to Key West, but it really is its own destination.